Hi everyone, and welcome to Exploring the Build. If you just found this place, then welcome, and if you're returning, I'm glad to have you back. I'm Alex, and this is my channel where we explore and theory craft different character builds for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Today, we are doing another one of our quick builds, where we'll be exploring a briefly summarized character build for D&D 5e. As always with our quick builds, if there's ever a build you'd like to see me explore in the future, be sure to let me know in the comments below. The concept for our build today comes from user Delayed Launch, who actually requested 3 different builds. Each of them are fairly unique and interesting, and while I do want to cover each one, I would rather give each one its own video, since I think they all deserve that level of merit. So I will be covering each one of them in their own videos, but with a bit of spacing between them, just to let some other requests in as well. To that end, the one we're going to start with today is the one that I personally found the most intriguing, and that is the Archer Samurai that was requested. They asked for an Archer Samurai who is a warrior that wears heavy armor and uses a longbow. Like the request says, we're going to be a little bit mad or multi-ability score dependent, but I think it'll make for an interesting ranged build. Now first of all, Archer Samurai, or heavily armored archers, are nothing new to both fantasy and of course real-world history. However, in D&D 5e they're a little hard to pull off. That's because strength and dexterity for our ability scores are kind of at odds with one another. You need strength to be able to wear heavy armor, but you need dexterity to wield a bow. And if you try to boost both of them to be pretty high, usually your mental ability scores like intelligence, wisdom, or charisma, or even constitution, may end up suffering because of it. Personally, I like to think of this character as not only being a heavily armored warrior with a bow, but something straight out of Warhammer Age of Sigmar, like the Stormcast Eternal Vigilers or Judicators, or Judiciators, however you pronounce them. Large, heavily armored crusader-like warriors who rain down holy fire on their opponents. With all that said, let's jump into the build. Starting in character creation with our lineage, anything really works for us, and technically if we were going full Warhammer Age of Sigmar, human would probably be best. However, I'm actually going to go elf with this one because we do want to pick up elven accuracy eventually, because it's going to pair really well with the samurai subclass of fighter that we are taking. Because even though I'm personally not necessarily theming this character to be a legitimate samurai archer, I do still want to use this samurai subclass. So speaking of elf with samurai, what actual subclass of elf could we use? Technically, any of them are fine, but I really like the idea of being an Eladrin or a Shadar Kai, simply because both of those lineages gain a bonus action teleport that they can use a number of times per day equal to their proficiency bonus, and that'll be a great get out of jail free card. Since we're building a ranged character, even though we're going to be pretty defensive with heavy armor, we still want to get out of melee if an enemy gets right up into our face. We're not necessarily going to be building to shoot into melee, so this is where that bonus action teleport can come in handy. As for our stats, we are definitely going to be multi-ability score dependent, and we're going to want the following array. We want to put a +1 into 3 separate ability scores, which we can do when we pick either Shadar Kai or Eladrin, so it doesn't really matter which one we choose. Starting with strength, we're going to want 14, putting 5 points into it to get to 13, and then a +1 to round up to an even 14. Dexterity, we're going to go all the way to 16 with, by putting 9 points into it and then another +1 there. We're going to put 7 points into Constitution to get us 14 there. We're going to leave Intelligence alone at 8, putting no points into it. And then we'll get our Wisdom to 14 with 5 more points into that and another +1 to round it up to 14. And then finally, we're going to put our last 1 point into Charisma. Obviously, in terms of how our stats could get redistributed, if you really wanted to, you can switch around all the mental ability scores, but I would leave the strength and the dexterity the way they are, because we need enough strength to wear heavy armor, and we want to be good with a bow, which primarily uses dexterity. As for our background, anything can work because anything should work. Okay, so now it's time for the actual level breakdown of the build. First of all, without really going into the exact levels individually, we're going to be looking at going to Fighter 11 and Cleric 9. We'd probably do the split such that we went up Fighter to about level 5 to get extra attack as quickly as possible, and then jump over to Cleric, jump all the way up to Cleric 9, and then just continue up to Fighter 11, keeping that 3rd extra attack as sort of our max level capstone. Before I get into why I'm taking specifically Cleric with Fighter, I want to talk about the feats we're going to pick up throughout our levels. First of all, Fighter 4/level 4, we want Heavy Armor Master. The only reason I'm taking this is because it's a mechanical feature that adds to our flavor. We don't just want to be an archer running around in heavy armor that just gives us an AC boost, because technically that AC boost is going to be relatively on par with us if we just went Dexterity based and used like studded leather armor while maxing out our Dexterity. Heavy Armor Master actually gives us a little bit of damage reduction while we have heavy armor on, and it gives us a +1 to our strength score, meaning we can increase that to 15 to now wear plate mail. Because this is a mechanical feat that's meant purely to aid our theme, if you want to skip it, you can, but I really like picking it up just to have that feeling of being a heavily armored character, so whenever a simple weapon like another archer's arrow or some goblin sword hits us, it just deals 3 less damage, unless it's magical. Fighter 6, which maybe we would actually want to pick up before jumping over to Cleric, we want Elven Accuracy. Elven Accuracy is kind of one of the main features we're building around with this build, so we definitely want to pick that up as early as possible. If you didn't grab Heavy Armor Master, grab it at 4, otherwise grab it at 6 and then go Cleric. As well, it's going to improve our Dexterity to 17, we'll have to find a way to round that off later on. Our next feat comes in at probably Cleric 4, which is just going to be Sharpshooter. Sharpshooter is a great feat to help us deal lots of damage, and because of how we're getting Elven Accuracy and we're going Samurai Fighter, we're going to have lots of advantage to make Sharpshooter work well. After that, the rest of our ability scores / feats are just going to be set to improving our stats. We're going to want to round off Dexterity to 18, whether through a half feat like Piercer, or just through improving that ability score by 1 and then a different one by 1. And then everything else is just improving ability scores by +2. They consist of improving our Constitution to about 16, our Wisdom to 16 as well, and then probably capping our Dexterity. So now it's time to talk about why pair the Samurai Fighter with Cleric. Well, Samurai Fighter in itself is really good with Elven Accuracy because Fighting Spirit allows us to gain advantage on all weapon attacks we make for the rest of our turn after using a bonus action, and we can do that 3 times per long rest. So with Elven Accuracy, when we attack using Dexterity or any of our mental attributes, we also basically gain super advantage. Really, we can just re-roll one of the 2 d20s that we do roll with advantage, but that's functionally the same thing as just rolling 3 d20s, so it's usually referred to as super advantage. Now, with that super advantage, on all of our attacks for a full turn, when we attack with Dexterity, that means that attacking with a bow is going to be very effective for us. We're more likely to crit, and we're really likely to hit, even with the penalty from Sharpshooter. The reason I like the idea of pairing this with Cleric is for the spells that Cleric gets. Specifically, Divine Favor, Crusader's Mantle, and Holy Weapon. Divine Favor we get right away when we pick up Cleric 1, since we're going to go with War Cleric, which has access to the spell on their expanded spell list. And as a first level spell, we can spend 1 bonus action to just get an extra d4 on all of our weapon attacks, including ranged weapon attacks. That may not seem like a lot, and it is a bonus action to invest before we do a big burst damage turn of a bunch of attacks with Fighting Spirit and super advantage. It'll be an investment for the full combat, getting an extra d4 on every single arrow we shoot. This eventually upgrades to Crusader's Mantle, which is the exact same spell, only it takes an action to cast instead of a bonus action, but then also it doesn't just apply the d4 to our weapon attacks, it affects all of our allies within 30 feet of us. So now it's basically a support feature that we're buffing all of our allies who would use weapons to attack. The capstone of Holy Weapon is where this gets really nutty. Holy Weapon is again a bonus action to cast, and its concentration up to an hour. We can just make whatever weapon we have deal an extra 2d8 radiant damage on a hit. And then there is also an extra kicker. If we ever want to end the spell early, we can do a little bit of a burst, some damage, and potentially blind a target. But really, if we can keep this up for a full combat, having an extra 2d8 radiant damage on every single arrow we shoot is really good. That's effectively like first level smite on every single bow shot. Those spells all really boost our arrow damage since they trigger on every hit, and we're very likely to hit thanks to Samurai and Elven Accuracy super advantage. Now of course we had to go War Cleric in order to pick up Divine Favor in the first place, and of course get Crusader's Mantle as well, so the spells are all ideally in one place for us. But we also gain extra benefits like War Priest, their basic feature from level 1 as a War Cleric, and Guided Strike. War Priest says that when we use the attack action, we can make one weapon attack as a bonus action, and we can do this a number of times equal to our Wisdom modifier. The uses of this feature refresh on a long rest, so we're not going to be using it all the time, but we also have Fighting Spirit. So really, if we want to do a big burst round with our action surge, Fighting Spirit's for sure the way to go. But when we run out of uses of Fighting Spirit, or we don't want that super advantage because we don't feel we don't really need to use it right now, we can just have a free bonus action arrow shot thanks to War Priest. Guided Strike, on the other hand, is our Channel Divinity use. It says that whenever we make an attack roll, we can use our Channel Divinity to gain a flat +10 bonus to the roll. There is War God's Blessing that we get at level 6, which changes this to potentially trigger when an ally makes an attack roll and we can help them out. But honestly, I'd rather just be selfish with it and use it 2 times for this feature per short rest, which the cleric can do once they hit level 6. This will make it so that even when we either don't have super advantage up, or if we do and we still somehow missed with our sharpshooter shot, we can just probably turn that miss into a hit by adding a flat +10. That is a really big bonus and should help offset sharpshooter. Overall, both mechanically and thematically, the 2 classes of Samurai Fighter and War Cleric both mesh together so well. For us, it makes us feel like a Stormcast Eternal or some sort of zealous archer that is clad in full heavy armor ready to crusade and rain down divine fury on their opponents. And other than that, that's pretty much the build. Let's look at some obvious other choices we could have went with if all we wanted to do was become a samurai archer or a heavily armored archer that also just dishes out lots of damage. Sticking with just fighter would honestly be a great option, and just going full samurai fighter. It would make us less mad because we wouldn't really need wisdom or charisma or intelligence or anything like that. We could just focus dexterity, strength, and constitution, and that'd be great. We'd also get extra feats like crossbow expert or gunner. And even if we weren't planning on using those weapons specifically because we want to use a bow, like the request said, it would allow us to make attacks with ranged weapons while in melee with opponents. And that's a big thing for some people. Personally, I don't mind having that disadvantage, as it gives us a little puzzle to try and play around. We need to find a way to get out of melee with our opponents instead of just standing there and shooting them down anyways. But if you really wanted one of those 2 feats, going up full fighter would definitely give you room to take them. Basic Samurai also gains Rapid Strike at level 15, which we just don't gain access to with this multi-class. Rapid Strike lets us trade advantage on one of our attacks for an extra free attack that can still benefit from advantage. That's a really good trade-off and a really great feature, and it's unfortunate that we don't get it with this multi-class. Other big option though is another multi-class, and that would be Warlock, especially the Hexblade. Hexblade is really a great contender for our first choice in multi-class, and probably the one that most people would go to, because if we just swapped our wisdom with our charisma, or maybe even our dexterity, we could just make our bow our packed weapon, focused on charisma instead, since we can use that to attack instead of dexterity, and then we would get all the benefits of being a Hexblade Warlock. We would get Hexblade's Curse to be able to mark one key opponent and deal extra damage, crit on 19s against them, which with super advantage from Elven Accuracy could be really nuts. Plus, if we get to 5th level Warlock, we can pick up the Invocation Eldritch Smite, which just says that as long as you make an attack with your packed weapon, then you can dump an Eldritch Smite into that attack. And now in all honesty, looking at that option compared to the option we went with, Hexblade usually came out on top for specifically burst damage. Plus, the spell slots we would be using to Smite refresh on a short rest instead of a long rest. Compared to our War Cleric, really, we're only getting our big capstone spell, Holy Weapon, once per day because we have one 5th level spell slot. So we're just trying to save that for our big fight. But besides that, we still have a lot more consistent damage actually. we have that one use of holy weapon that can last for a full hour. And then once it's gone, we'll still have a whole bunch of other spell slots to be able to use, things like Divine Favor and Crusader's Mantle, which deal less damage, but again are still concentration spells that can last for full combats, which really racks up damage over time, especially if we're adding damage to all of our allies as well with Crusader's Mantle. And of course the last thing to mention is our scaling, especially with Heavy Armor Master. Like I said originally, Heavy Armor Master was a feat that we took to give us a mechanical incentive that reinforces our theme. We want to wear heavy armor and feel like we're wearing it with purpose, and getting that extra little bit of damage reduction can do that for us. But if it's not something that you desperately wanted and you're just okay with throwing on a suit of plate mail and still running around a battlefield with your bow and arrow in that sense, then you can definitely do that. Overall, it's really up to you and how you want to multi-class or build your samurai archer or heavily armored archer in our case. But for what it's worth, I think that the cleric multi-class fits both thematically and mechanically. Let me know what you thought of the build, or what you would add or change to get closer to the idea of a heavily armored archer, or even specifically a samurai archer as well. Thank you so much for joining me on the journey, and I hope to see you in the next one.